The air in the Abyssus 9 doesn't feel like air. It feels like something that has been chewed on, spat out, and recycled through 1,000 rusted filters until it tastes like old copper pennies and wet wool. Every breath is a reminder that I am 10,000 feet below where any human being was ever meant to exist. I sat in the observation lounge, staring into the viewport. Outside, there is nothing. Not the nothing you see when you close your eyes in a dark room, but a thick, physical weight of Vantablack water that wants to collapse this titanium bubble like a soda can under a boat. The glass is cold. If I press my forehead against it, the chill seeps directly into my skull, a numbing, crystalline ache that vibrates with the low-frequency hum of the station's life support. Hum, thrum, hum. That is the sound of survival. It is the sound of the scrubbers struggling against the CO2. It is the sound of the pumps fighting the ocean. I was checking the pressure gauges for the third time that hour, purely out of a need to touch something solid. The metal of the console was oily under my fingertips, coated in a fine layer of condensation that smelled faintly of stagnant pond water and ozone. The station is old. It creaks. The bulkheads groan under the weight of 500 atmospheres, a sound like a giant grinding its teeth in a fitful sleep. Then it happened. Tink. A single, sharp, metallic strike. It wasn't the groan of the station. It wasn't the hum of the fans. It was deliberate. Tink, tink, tink. 3 beats, rhythmic, measured. It sounded like someone taking a ball-peen hammer to the outer hull. I froze. My heart didn't race. It stalled. The air in my lungs suddenly felt 5 degrees colder, a sharp, icy needle in my chest. I looked at the sonar, flat, empty. The external cameras showed nothing but the swirling marine snow, the decaying organic debris of the upper ocean that drifts down like ghostly ash. Tink, tink, tink. It was louder now. It wasn't coming from the viewport. It was coming from Section 4, the aft maintenance lock. I stood up, my knees popping in the silence. The floor beneath my boots was vibrating, a subtle rhythmic throb that I could feel in my molars. I walked toward the bulkhead door, the smell of the station shifting as I moved. Near the galley, it was the scent of scorched coffee and rot, but as I approached Section 4, the air turned brine. It was the smell of a salt marsh at low tide, thick, sulfurous, and ancient. The corridor was narrow, the walls slick with a greasy moisture that clung to my skin like a second, unwanted layer of sweat. The lights flickered, a stuttering yellow glow that made the shadows at the end of the hall dance and stretch. Tink, tink, tink. I reached the hatch. This was the secondary exit. It hadn't been cycled in 30 years. Not since the 1996 decommissioning of the lower levels. The wheel was fused with layers of rust and salt crust, looking like a jagged orange scab on the face of the door. I pressed my ear to the cold steel. The sound wasn't just a knock, it was a call. I could hear the vibration of the water on the other side, the muffled, heavy roar of the deep. And then the knock happened again, but this time it was followed by a scrape, the sound of metal on metal. Something was dragging a sharp edge across the exterior of the hatch. "Who's there?"
I whispered. My voice sounded thin, fragile, like paper tearing in a storm. There was no answer, only the rhythmic knocking. I looked at the maintenance log hanging on a clipboard by the door. The paper was yellowed and damp, the ink blurred into illegible blue bruises. I wiped the grime from the bottom of the page. Hatch 4B, permanent seal, 1996. Do not open. The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. I could hear the blood rushing through my own veins, a frantic, wet pulsing in my ears.
Then a voice. It didn't come from the intercom. It didn't come from a radio. It came through the metal. It was a wet, gurgling sound, like someone trying to speak with a mouthful of seawater and silt. Let us in. The smell hit me then. It bypassed the filters. It bypassed the seals. It was the smell of absolute decay, of things that have spent decades decomposing in a pressurized tomb. It was the scent of a drowned world. I backed away, my boots slipping on the wet floor. The temperature in the corridor plunged. I could see my breath now, a pale, ghostly mist that hung in the stagnant air. Creak. The rusted wheel of the hatch began to turn. It shouldn't have been possible. The gears were seized. The pressure outside was 5 tons per square inch. Nothing could turn that wheel from the outside. Clack, clack, clack. The sound of the locking lugs retracting, one by one. I scrambled back toward the main hub, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grip the ladder. I looked back one last time. The hatch was opening, just a crack. A thick black liquid began to ooze through the gap. It wasn't oil, it wasn't seawater, it was darker, a fluid that seemed to absorb the flickering light of the corridor. It smelled of ancient mud and the iron tang of old blood. And then, a hand. It didn't look human. The skin was translucent, stretched tight over bone, white as a dead fish's belly. The nagels were gone, replaced by jagged, blackened points that scratched at the edge of the frame. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The air was too thick, too heavy with the smell of the trench. I reached the hub and slammed the emergency bulkhead, sealing Section 4 away. I sat there, leaning against the door, listening to the sound of my own frantic breathing. But then, I felt it, the vibration in the floor. Tink, tink, tink. It wasn't coming from the hatch anymore. It was coming from the floor beneath me, from the pipes, from the vents. They weren't just at the door, they were in the walls. They were in the station. I looked at the security monitor. The screen was filled with static, but through the snow, I could see them. Figures, dozens of them, standing in the dark corridors of the decommissioned levels. They weren't moving, they were just waiting. The smell of brine and decay is getting stronger now. It's coming from the air vents. I looked down at my hands. They were pale, translucent. I could see the dark black fluid moving through my veins. The pressure isn't outside anymore. It's inside. And the knocking is coming from my own chest. Tink, tink,